This is a retrospective that covers 40 years of the career of DeFeo. She's an artist who's best known for one work, The Rose, which she spent almost 8 years making. There are more than 130 works in the exhibition. If you count all of the jewelry pieces, actually about 160. So this is the first opportunity for the public and scholars to see this much of DeFeo's work. She made this work in 1958. It's called The Eyes, and she actually made this drawing, we believe, from a photograph of her own eyes. And she said that she needed to make this work in order to envision what came afterwards, in particular the rose. So she made it in '58 and then began the rose in 1958. And I think if you imagine that she is looking out at the world from behind these eyes, you can start to anticipate that what comes afterwards might be on a gigantic scale. So this is the work for which DeFeo has, to this date, been most recognized. It's called The Rose. She worked on it from 1958 to 1966, so almost 8 years. And it's primarily oil paint on canvas. She would literally build up the oil paint to a thickness, wait for it to dry partially, and then carve into it using a palette knife or trowel. So it's as much sculpture as it is painting. She did a diagram of her works in which she placed the rose at the center, so it functions like a pinwheel or a spiral, and you see everything that came before kind of going into it, and everything that comes afterwards is being spun out of the rose. And that's why I think a retrospective is so important, because you can't really understand the rose, which is the work for which she's best known, unless you understand what comes before it and what comes after it. And it's hard to understand either the work that comes after or before without the rose. All of the work makes more sense when it's seen comprehensively. After DeFeo finished The Rose in 1966, she stopped working, and she didn't work again until 1970, and this is the first work that she completed. It's a very different presentation, a very different process. She's using acrylic and working on paper. And this is an image that she found in a book on shells. It's actually a depiction of a cockle shell, a ribbed cockle shell. I think she felt like she needed to always challenge herself. You know, she was working primarily to please herself, not for a gallery or a market. And so in doing so, she wanted to constantly challenge herself with new materials, new processes, and she would get bored or tired. If she had been working in one vein for too long, then she would want to swing back to the other side. And she talks about that pendulum swing in her journals and in her letters. And I think that this is probably, you know, the most extreme pendulum swing to go from the rose to something like this. But it's something that happened throughout her career, that there's a rhythm of back and forth. This is a piece called Dove 1, which DeFeo made in 1989, the year that she died. At the time she made this, she knew that she had lung cancer. She was diagnosed in the spring of 1988. She found a wounded dove in her basement, probably that her dogs had gotten to, and she tried to save it. She took the bird and put it in a shoebox and brought it to a veterinary ER. But the bird didn't make it. She wrote in her journals that she really related to this bird, and the only thing that she could really focus on was the eye of the bird looking back at her, and she said that the bird was, you know, facing its death with such valiancy and facing suffering with such courage, and she took that, I think, as an inspiration. So I think it's incredibly poignant, and it's one of the reasons it's you know, in the last room on the last wall of the show. She left open this room for spontaneity, for responding to her materials, for having sort of these moments of wonder within the process of making art. She felt everyone brought their own meaning to the piece, and she wanted to leave it open, and she wanted everyone to have a unique experience with that work of art and not try and limit it or place too many parameters by giving it a definition or a meaning.